Hello and welcome to the second season of Lights, Camera, Inclusion, the first video series by Now and Next, the Canada Media Fund's editorial platform. We're here in Vancouver to meet some movers and shakers from the screen-based industry who are doing important work when it comes to representation, inclusive practices, and teamwork. We're going to be talking to some very inspiring and brave creators, directors, and leaders who have made it their mission to pave the way for the next generation of storytellers from across the country. Follow me. In this first episode, I'm joined by longtime friends Sean Valera and Kashif Pasta. The pair founded Dunya Media, a production company focused on telling BIPOC stories with a global impact. Sean and Kashif's work on authentic representation also includes special attention to those behind the camera, highlighting their contribution and valuing their well-being on set. Sean and Kashif, thank you so much for being here today. I'm really happy to talk to you guys. You guys are childhood friends. You grew up in Surrey, which is one of the most culturally diverse cities in Canada. So first of all, what was your childhood like, and how did you two meet, and how did you two become friends?
Yeah, growing up in Surrey, I was born and raised there, and it's this kind of amazing place where there's such a huge South Asian community in particular, where like I didn't even really ever feel like a minority, I guess, in a sense. Like, you know, your school has Diwali as a holiday. There's like Bhangra teams at every school. You could take French or Punjabi as a class at school. So really grew up in that environment where you didn't necessarily feel super othered, which has kind of given us this weird like cultural confidence, I feel like, as well in our work. And then we met in grade 8 at Tamanwa Secondary. Sham's dad used to be my sister's science teacher.
Okay.
So I kind of like heard about like, you know, like familiar with the family. And so then we met in like a infotech class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's exactly 20 years in a month.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
Happy anniversary,
Yeah,
you guys.
thank you
so much.
Thank you, thank you. Yes.
Sham got married this year. It was like a changing of the guards where it was like his wife, I was like talking to his wife. I'm like, okay, I get it. You're like the priority now.
It's so funny. My wife's name, first name starts with a K as well, so it's K. It was
wedding was
KS.
all KS,
It was
KS,
all.
and I was like,
I'm like, yes.
That's a sign.
It's a great way to celebrate 20 years. Yeah.
That's amazing. So when did you realize that you wanted to, tell stories to empower underrepresented voices and that you wanted to do it together?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, I don't know that it started as a representation thing for us. I think for both of us, it was actually a genuine love of film and storytelling first. And like when I was little, I thought that all movies and TV shows were real. And so it took like watching Saved by the Bell with my older sisters, and they had to correct me and be like, that's not real kids in real high school. And that blew my mind. I'm like, so they're pretending, and why are they pretending? Is to make people happy. So that like broke my brain at 3 years old, and I just never got out of that phase. And then I know for you, it's very family based.
Yeah, for me, it was very family based. I grew up, my parents loved movies. We used to go see it like every weekend, especially Bollywood movies. There used to be this one movie theater in Vancouver that played it, and that was
Cinemas?
it, Raja Cinemas.
We're probably both there at the same time.
Yeah. And I remember like the movies were great, and you'd have like the halftime, and everyone would mingle and talk about the movie and stuff, and it'd be exciting. And then I remember my mom being very specific of like after the movie was over, she always questioned us, me and my brother, being like, what'd you learn? What'd you think about this character? Like, did you see how this person behaved to their parents? You need to be like this.
It's propaganda for brown.
Yeah,
Bollywood
exactly,
is
yeah.
propaganda for brown moms.
You gotta be a nice brown son. And I'm like, but what got out of that, and we used to host a lot of family, like we always had an open door policy at our house growing up, and family would come over and they would always chat about movies and how good it was and this and that. And I really, like I don't know why, but from a young age, I noticed the influence that movie had on culture, on conversations, on just the way people talk about life. And I always wanted to see, always had that like curiosity towards film.
Yeah, and then I think when we met when we were 13, 14, like we just had that passion for it and the enthusiasm for it and wanting to like, because you've met someone else who also is interested in how do we solve this puzzle of making something. And then the more things you make, then the more you encounter the barriers and start to realize, oh, there's a reason, we saw people who look like us on screen in like a Bollywood context, but not necessarily North American context. Then you start to see like, oh, there's structural reasons behind this. So as you solve the puzzle of like how to make a film on a technical level, then the puzzles start to grow of like, okay, how do you get something funded? Why hasn't someone been doing this? What were the barriers? And then it starts to become a lot more about realizing like that it's also important from
It
a
was along
community.
the way, basically.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Not until we started interacting with the system that it became apparent,
Yeah.
right? Because when we were doing everything ourselves, it's like, yeah, but I mean, there is literally nothing stopping us,
Yeah.
right? Like
That
we
like
had a
teenage
we had a camera,
enthusiasm where you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm 15, I could
And that's still alive? That's still like driving you, that energy?
somehow, yes. I think we should technically be jaded, but I think there's a certain, I don't know I don't know if it's like
Wonder of childhood, right? That's still
so.
like, you
Yeah.
know, that feeling.
I think you
that-
have to survive.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel like the biggest piece of that is that we're business partners. Because I feel like if I was with anybody else, I wouldn't have that like that 20-year history.
Yeah, yeah.
I would just be like, yeah, let's just move on. Like let's cut our losses, move on. But the fact that we've been together for a while, like we know each other's like passions and their visions, and we're able to work through issues together. I think that's been the big thing that's keeping our spark alive.
It's like to a certain extent, you almost want you might feel the light start to die, but you want to maintain it in the other person, and that kind of sounds very romantic the way I'm saying it. But
I was gonna say,
it's-
yeah, that's
But it's like, and in that process, you find the spirit of Christmas yourself, and like that, then it kind of
carries
bounces
you.
back.
You're gonna hate this, but yeah, we really are the definition of high school sweetheart.
Yeah, that's true. I don't hate it at all. I don't hate it at all.
that's so lovely.
Yeah, we both have wives now. They deal with it.
Yeah, they understand.
But yeah, I think we probably both haven't been down at the same time. I think that's what it is. And so as long as you can be like, oh, I can, and also because there is that spirit of problem solving, or because we started with no concept of the system. Like Vancouver has a big film industry, but we were in Surrey, so like you'd see articles that say, oh, $1 billion in spending, but like where? Like that's not a world that is visible to us.
Right.
So starting out just kind of, again, like in that second gen immigrant spirit of like very small businessy, that's what we saw my parents do, what we see in the community. And you see this generation of folks who are facing systemic barriers, but they're problem solvers ultimately.
And talking about family, how did your families react when you said, I want to be a filmmaker?
I think we had different different reactions.
stories.
Mine was interesting because I just finished my MCAT. I actually got into med school, and that summer, Kashif and I kind of I haven't seen him in a while. He was working, and then we kind of got together for dinner and stuff. And we always wanted to kick around this idea of like starting a production company, our own production company, and that idea came out during that dinner, and we kind of both went home being like, maybe this could work, because we both weren't feeling our careers fully. Like I wasn't really wanting to go into med school fully, and Kashif wasn't.
I was pulling 90-hour weeks in feature visual effects going, this isn't why I got into it. Like it was still just heroic white dude movies, and every couple years you'd get like a Fast and Furious movie with some melanin, and like other than that, it wasn't fully. So I'm like, this isn't fully it either. Yeah.
And so we kind of talked to, like, we had a couple more dinners, talked it out, thought of like a couple business models, and then I kind of had to pitch it to my parents, being like, hey, I'm not going to med school. I'm going to defer for a year.
Yeah, we'll try for 6 months. We'll try for a year. It's not like permanent.
If we can figure out a way to make money, make a business model work, then we'll pursue that way. If not, I can still go next year. It was still hard to
Like the packaging was right.
Yeah.
I didn't realize Sham got into med school. I fully didn't know that. So I think we were like maybe 6-8 months into our company, and we were in post-production on our first show that we did for TELUS. And Sham got a call from med school being like, hey, so we held your spot. Are you coming in? And he's like, no, I'm good. And I was like, wait, who was that? He's like, that was med school. I was like, you got it. I thought he failed his MCAT. And I saw how hard he studied. And then he was willing to start this production company. I was like, that's awkward. I'm not going to bring it up. Like, it's okay. We all fail. Like, I just didn't say anything, and he also didn't say anything.
That's hilarious.
And then I was like, well, why didn't you take it? He's like, because we're doing this. And I was like, oh, okay, it's serious. Like, that's real.
That's what we call it.
Yeah. For me, it was a bit earlier. Like, I don't know that there was a particular moment where I declared it. My dad is similar to Sham's mom in terms of like very much a movie person. His dad used to take him to movies in Pakistan in the 60s. And so he had that enthusiasm. And when I was 14 or 15, he sat me down and really like laid out the concerns about pursuing that as a career. And hey, and a lot of his concerns were based on what he observed in the industry of like, look at this, successful director, and look at, what's happening like family-wise for them. And, he just felt that separation out from the personal side from family. And I was like, well, for me I'll just make sure not to do that. But what I really heard in it was every issue my dad had assumed I would be successful. So I was like, so he believes. His issue is
believes in
that not
me.
that he thinks I won't make it.
That's
It's
beautiful.
that when you make it, this might happen, this might happen. I was like, okay, great.
Yeah.
Actually, my dad believes in me. Let's give it 10 years. And so that was when I was like, maybe 14, 15, and maybe like 8, 9 years in, like, he went to enough film festivals with enough awards, he caught the rhythm and really enjoyed it. And so, yeah, I think it's like a slow transition over time, yeah.
Yeah, beautiful stories, both of you, honestly.
Yeah, and to their credit, like as much as discomfort they might have had, they've been our biggest supporters. Since day
Yeah,
one, so.
yeah.
I watched a few of your productions, and yeah, a lot of them hit home. And I just want us to take a break and just watch the ad that you produced about diabetes and first generation immigrants. Let's do that.
Sounds good.
Break it down. Who at the top? I'ma bring them down. I will not stop till you laying down. Till I'm at the top and I'm gazing down. It ain't been the same since we came around. Since we became kings and became renowned. Since all of the truth started raining down. If you want that belt, better buckle down.
You've worked hard your whole life and built a legacy. So, after all that, are you really going to let sugar take you down?
Outside, outside. Looking at the stars, staring with my mouth wide. Yeah. I ain't letting nobody stop me this time. Every single level that I reach and I climb. They ask, are you from? You are just not on my level. You are just not on my level.
Mitas.org. Don't eat sweet. Live sweet.
Very powerful. And honestly, I mentioned that it hit home. Both my grandmas died from complications of diabetes. So that's, when I say it hits home, it really does, right?
Yeah.
We always talk about that first generation, sometimes referred to as the sacrifice generation. How important is it that that first generation sees themselves on screen in a meaningful way?
So happy you brought that up, because like that was a big thing going into our ad from the beginning, like the concept stage, because I've been really fortunate to grow up around my grandparents, and they are a force to be reckoned with. Moved here with nothing to having multiple families and all that, and my grandpa has had like 4 strokes and still kicking around because he really believed in like this like really healthy lifestyle. Like he can't eat food unless he had salad and stuff like that, and so he really ingrained in us of like, not only 1 being healthy, but 2 having the willpower to do this work, and to see him and to see all of them grow up and be so powerful. That was a big concept for us to like kind of show them what we see in them, and that was
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, I think for us, like, representation is really important, but what's really important to us is who's centered in the story. And so in the case of something like this, yeah, kind of like Sham said, it's how we see them, and oftentimes, like, one of the big values of being able to tell stories is, one, just reflecting that reality back to the community, and also without having our own stories to tell, like, oftentimes people's personal history just starts from their like point of view or from when their family landed, and oftentimes like we feel like each generation thinks they've like invented something brand new, and hopefully each generation is pushing forward, but I think it actually can kind of make each one feel like things are more possible when you realize that you're part of a continuum. And that's a big thing growing up as like a second-gen immigrant or growing up BIPOC, is like you have this really strong sense that your story starts before you were born and ends after you're gone. And so any way to reflect that sensibility, whether it's literally in this ad or with telling stories, that kind of, a lot of our stuff ends up being very intergenerational, and I think that's a big reason why.
Yeah, and that's a very nice segue into my next question about your latest short, Desi Standard Time Travel. And one thing that was very apparent is how wholesome all the characters, but the dad character was, and the parents. You showed them in a very human light with their flaws and their qualities, and just going through life and doing their best, and sometimes questioning themselves and talking about stereotypes and representation. I feel that and that's not specific to Canada, I guess, but when you get that second generation trying to portray the first generation sometimes as comedians, or this stereotypical Asian parents and all their flaws, and that sometimes we can be that's what's deemed funny. So that's the easy way to go. And I feel you didn't do that. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think a big thesis for a lot of our work is what if people of color were people? Like just imagine they're actual humans, and I think like that's a frustration with what you might call like the more mainstream representation, of course, but oftentimes it can seep into our own representations of ourselves, but kind of just because there's these narrative shortcuts, right? So like you said, oftentimes that idea that like the parents are the punchline, it's an easy joke, and that's fine, but what is that saying on a deeper level, right? And what is that saying about how you see yourself? And oftentimes actually like a flaw in my own writing that's been improved over time is initially the characters would actually be too perfect. And I realized I was actually dehumanizing ourselves by not giving us flaws, right? And so being able to, it's a really tough thing to break through mentally and artistically. It's deceptively simple though. It's like, what if you had human emotions? And we're a little bit in unburdening from that representation aspect, you actually get towards a more authentic representation that's also more accessible to a larger audience too. And so we find a lot of our work is actually very accessible. People who are outside the community really like it, even though we're not making them the primary audience. And so some of it's a trust in that mainstream audience as well, to be like, I don't want to treat you as stupid.
Yeah,
I
and
believe you'll
mean,
get it.
And to your point, like it feels like when you connect to the deeper emotions, it doesn't matter if that particular person is from that particular community
Yeah.
because we can just connect.
Exactly.
Because we don't want to make the work feel like homework, right? And either for ourselves of like, if you want to look at a story about yourself, it's going to be dark and difficult and make yourself feel bad about yourself. But also for mainstream audience, like you don't have to feel like, oh, every story about them, okay. And then it's going to be like that. And then also people get tricked into a false sense of I've done the work because I watched that thing. So check mark, I'm a good person. And I was like, no, we're going to challenge that a little bit. We're going to make it a better time at the movies. But now that's not going to make you feel like, okay, I felt bad for 90 minutes, therefore I've done my like guilt quota and I'm good.
I think a lot of our work is also grounded in joy, wonder, and fun, and so we do a lot of like prep work when we're dealing with concepts and we're beginning to write and stuff, and that idea of like what brings you joy, what brings you your emotions up. And for me, not to go, I'm okay spoiling it a little bit, but the fact that in Desi Center Time Travel, when the son sees his parents dance, and he's having that moment, and for me that hit home. Like to me, I started like really feeling my emotions there, versus like just the ending of it, for example. Like
Yeah, it's hard to keep a dry eye on.
Yeah, and
I appreciate that.
yeah, and so for me, I'm like, when people are having fun, I find that so comforting and like that's what life's supposed to be. Not always, but like you're supposed to have those moments. Everyone's supposed to have those moments, and you often forget in your day to day, your stuff like that, and especially when you're dealing with like your immigrant parents, you forget how much they've been through, and sometimes like they might have a different point of view, but that doesn't mean that they didn't have their fun, they didn't have their like worries and scaredness.
It's not
and happiness.
all about the struggle.
That they were real
It is
people.
about the
That they were real
struggle, but it's
people.
not all about the struggle.
Yeah,
For
there
sure.
were real people in and amongst it, and so.
Yeah.
So they had joyful times, they had scary times, they had fun times, and to kind of showcase that and make them more human. Yeah.
So obviously you're both from what I would call like the global South Asian diaspora. You're not from the same religious background though. So I was curious to know how that diversity in terms of religion, contributed to your success, helped you, reach broader audiences, and has it ever been a challenge?
I'll take the challenge first, which is no, it's never been a challenge, which has kind of been surprising. Ever since high school, we both had this strong sense of religion/spirituality, and we used to always have like really nice conversations of like, oh, this is what the Quran says about this topic, and I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. Tell me more. Or like, or then that night or the next day, I'd go back and read what like the Hindu scriptures would say, and I'm like, oh, this is what it says in the Hindu scriptures, and we we talk about it, we debate a lot, we'd like always come to the idea of like so many similarities, right? We kind of built this friendship where there's like no malice between us, fortunately, and so it never felt like there was a barrier between us. It was more, there was no winning, right? It was more like informing.
Yeah.
And we grew up with that, and like I've been to Jummah with him at the mosques, and he's come to.
I've hosted
the
Diwali.
Yeah,
for
he's
some-
hosted
I don't even know
Diwali.
if the audience
Not only
knows,
that,
but
but he has a prayer spot in my house and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And like his parents give us sweets for Diwali and stuff, and like we've really grown up with this idea of like look at all points of view and then focus on the thing that matters to you.
And that carried into how you work together.
Yeah, we grew up in pretty diverse families with like parents who had friends of different backgrounds, and I think and then growing up in a city in a country where that was true as well, right? So I think ultimately we actually made each other more Hindu, more Muslim, more because you actually sometimes when you grow up fully immersed in a community, it's like a fish doesn't know water is wet kind of thing, right? So you don't really know why you're doing something, so you maybe follow it, maybe don't. But because we had each other to like kind of question that, it ultimately I think it made it stronger in terms of like me being particular about certain Hindu things at, like in a production.
Yeah.
Or like I become the Hindu consultant because I'm like, no, it's got to be like that. And kind of similar the other way where it's like we kind of keep each other to those standards in a sense. And then also that if you can call that like a practice of empathy, it's relatively easy to project that onto other people and be like, okay, I understand how to understand. So now if it's a completely new group or a variation on something, like how do you approach that? It's like you're practiced in that, yeah.
That's a great point you made because like just bringing it back to like Desi Standard Time Travel, one thing we did that's a common practice for us is have prayer breaks in between.
Oh, yeah.
And we had a bunch of Muslims actually on our crew.
It's our first time having more than like one or two.
Yeah. And they were so like happy, shocked, surprised, like they were just excited that there was like a break for them to like just do this. They didn't have to like hide or anything. It's like, yeah, let's take that 5 minutes. Like it's not hard.
Yeah, you can make up your own rules.
Yeah.
That's amazing because my next question was literally, what does inclusion on screens and behind the camera look to you, and what are the practices that you've put in place to make that happen?
Yeah, neither of us went to film school, so that's a challenge in its own way. It also means certain practices and habits we didn't learn. And so for us, building from first principles of like, okay, well, this is how we want to be treated and this is how we want to run things. For us, a lot of times, like inclusion on set, it's about creating an environment where everyone can bring their full selves. Again, like I said, visual representation, okay, like it's fine, we can do it. But that diversity of thought and casting the right crew members, if that makes sense, right? You're picking people with the right combination. It's not just a random collection of people. It's very intentional per project. And again, creating an environment where those people can bring their full selves. A lot of times that started with heads of department for us, and then they already know their crews, so they can bring in the right people. And so completely unintentionally, I think what's our average is it's like, we did the math once, it's like 80% BIPOC crews and 65, 70% female and non-binary, but no, it was never a mandate. It's just how things worked
organic.
out. And then people feel good about it, then they want to come back and work with us again. And so, yeah, even from like a cynical business point of view, it's like, well, don't you want people to want to work with you? Like,
Of course.
it's only so big of a community, right? Like you want to create that kind of environment where I think like a lot of times people make film harder than it has to be, and it's already hard. So we don't need to like add extra layers to like prove that, yeah, I went into the arts, but it's actually really difficult. It's like, it is difficult anyways. Like, just embrace it. And yeah.
Can I ask about your next projects and what's your vision for your company? I don't know, 10 years. Where would you like to be?
Yeah, right now we're in the middle of a couple things. So we're adapting Desi Standard Time Travel into a feature that's in development with Telefilm.
Yeah, absolutely. And while watching it, it felt like that's going to be I'm not gonna say easy, but I can see definitely how that could become like a feature film.
I appreciate that, yeah. And when you were talking about your emotional reaction, I'm like, yeah, I'm still in the middle of like, can I earn it in a 90-minute story and figuring that out. There's another feature that I want to direct that I don't know when this is coming out, but it's submitted to Talent to Watch. We'll see. And then Sean's working on a whole.
Yeah, and then we have a slate of series that we're working with a couple partners that's really like MENA and South Asian focused. And so hopefully gets those types of stories out there. A few features. And kind of like continuing on building this pipeline of like going from development to production out to the public. These stories that center the people who we're talking about. And so I think that's our biggest focus, yeah.
Yeah, and we're just trying to figure out, again, we started with like solving puzzles of like, how do we get a camera to make this short, to do this thing? And it just scales up and up and up to going, okay, what is holding Canadian film back? What is holding stories like this back? Who along the process is adding value? Who's sending a 2-line email and maybe massing it as value, and really going step by step to try to use each film to like make that change happen one like half step at a time, yeah.
I was going to ask you, what is the single change that you would like to see in the screen-based industry in the next few years?
I think the big thing right now is there's still an old guard that's taken up a lot of the funding or resources or has a lot of the voice that's out there. I think there's a lot of new talent, not even new talent, but like a different talent that's being created. A lot of experienced writers, showrunners who are BIPOC that are trying to get their show made. That's incredible, but they just they don't have the right either partners, or they're just not pushing through the system because X, Y, and Z. And so I hope the system takes a bit more of a chance, puts a little bit more time and resources into some of these different avenues, I would say, to be politically correct.
Yeah. I was like, I took that time to also think of what's the more palatable version of what I want to say. I'll do both. But I think like if it was like one thing, I think it's like more experimentation, more of a spirit of experimentation. And I know
Or
that's
staking.
hard. Yeah, and I know that's tough sometimes in a public funding environment because you have to, report what you've done with taxpayer money. I think, it's always like very rosy looking at other countries and picking at specific initiatives and be like, oh, they're doing it cool. I'm sure internally things are different everywhere, but I think more of that spirit of risk taking. I think that there's such a potential for that to be Canada's brand, of like taking those risks because we're already taking the financial hits. It's not like we can't take risks because what if we lose money? The money loss is happening, so that's done. So might as well also take some risks. Globally, there's this massive, massive, massive demand for English language, French language, BIPOC-led content. It's a measurable demand. It's not a secret. It's not a suspicion. Our Canadian culture, we are such a microcosm of where global culture is going. It is so rare to have a place where you have so many different cultures so authentically getting to be themselves that's really unique. Now, macroeconomically, countries like import what they need and they export what they have in excess of. So like in the film world, America is exporting a lot of like white-led English language content, filling most of the demand. The UK is filling in the gaps. So the question becomes, how much of a need is there for Canadian content? But then like BIPOC in Canada is thought of as a subcategory of regular. So we're in demand globally. But if domestically we're a subcategory of a thing that's maybe not in demand globally, it's this opportunity that exists now today that some other country will take. Other countries, they're getting better at production. They're getting up there. In 4 or 5 years, it's a thing where it's like, we just don't hit that window. And then maybe in like 10 years, there's a study and they say, oh, we could have done it. And we saw it happen through COVID, right? We do a lot of healthcare communications. We tried to push for like, hey, we need culturally relevant healthcare communications for COVID. They're like, hey, look, it's an emergency. We don't do that. Okay. Then 6 months later, it was like, oh, all these BIPOC people, that's what's spreading COVID. We're like, no, but we tried to pitch that and people died. And okay. And then this week, I saw a study that was like, looking back, it seems like COVID disproportionately affected people of color. And we're like, man, like I saw people straight up die, right? So there's the fun thing of art and then you see the impact of it. And so the one change I would say is like more experimentation and then also just a recognition of like the world is a competitive place and we are able to meet that competitive demand if we believe in Canada the way that the world believes in Canada. Globally, we have a cool brand, but domestically, we don't fully believe it. So I think confidence in Canada's own self. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're gonna end on that note. Thank you.
Yeah, nice.
Thank you so much.
Amazing.